And then Jamie and I are going to try to make sure that this is in fact working. And I believe that it is working now. There is a bit of a lag between us and YouTube, somewhere between 10 and 30 seconds. All right. Well, there's at least a few people watching. At least we have a handful of people watching. So thank you for joining us this evening. I am thankful that you're all here, and I'm thankful to Danielle, Lee, and Chris and Kirsten for all being here to help with this event, and my other people who are helping behind the scenes from the Diana Initiative to make this happen, including Jamie, and all of the people who've been, excited about this for us to try to help you, and been retweeting it. So we'll get started in just a second. I'm John Stoner. I am with the Diane Initiative as the Career Village lead again. So I'm excited about that. And I'm not going to do a huge background. If you're interested, you can ask a question YouTube. But Kirsten and Lee, if you guys want to do a brief intro, I think that would make sense. And hopefully Danielle comes back. She's in the car, so she may drop in now.
Hi, I am Kirsten Renner. Um, I won't go into a big, deep background either, but I've been in the recruiting field for a little over 20 years, and I'm happy to be here to help.
Thank you.
And hi, I'm Lee Snyder. I'll also avoid going into a background, but feel free to do your OSINT and your deep dive all you want or ask questions. And I'm excited to be here. I also am on staff at TDI. And yeah, just ask your questions. We're looking forward to it.
And then we've got Danielle back, who's in the car. She's nice enough to join us in her long trip today. If you wanted to do a real quick intro, just to let people kind of know who you are before we dive in.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle McVeigh. I've worked at Booz Allen Hamilton, a consulting firm, for 13 years, and also cross paths with John from time to time, which is how I ended up being able to support this event. So great to be here.
Yes, Danielle and I have done a number of interviews the last 6 weeks together, including the last one that we did Friday afternoon together, along with one of our other colleagues. So if you're not familiar with the Diana Initiative, I just wanted to sort of, give a quick intro about that. So this is an organization, it's a nonprofit focused on diversity in the cybersecurity space. So it's been around for a number of years. I should probably know that off the top of my head, but I don't. But several years now. We were in person in Vegas the same week as DEF CON and RSA and B-Sides Vegas. Then COVID happened, so we've done a few virtual events. Last year, we were both virtual and finally back in person again. So I was really excited because it was my first in person with the Diana Initiative, and it was amazing. And you can see that sort of the values around inclusion, diversity, humanity, initiative, and respect. So we're a little bit different than other organizations in this space. And we really are here to help everyone and be as inclusive as we can. So I just wanted to put that up there. And if anybody wants these slides, we'll make the slides available as well. Like the slides are available to anybody because there'll be resources and links. And you can Google the Diana Initiative and come up. And we're on Discord now, so that's exciting. So this is what we're going to try to cover today in the, Hack Your Interview. A lot of the career villages really focus on resumes. And since I have probably done 150 interviews this year, I wanted to change it up a little bit. And that's all from the hiring manager perspective. So I really wanted to, be helpful. And we kind of had this plan before sort of the wave of layoffs have occurred in the last couple of weeks. So hopefully this will help you. So we're going to talk about prepping for the interview, the purpose of the interview, technical questions, non-technical questions, the remote interview, maybe some things to try to avoid in an interview, which is always an interesting topic, and can become fairly controversial. Other advice. And then if you are watching and you have questions, we will be answering questions either throughout the stream or when we get through this first part. I'm hoping we'll get through this first part in maybe like about 30 minutes and then really try to have interactive questions and answers with whoever's out there in the cyberverse, or we'll just have some conversation amongst ourselves for a while. And if we're getting questions, I will be here all 3 hours. And if we're not getting that questions and answers, then we'll sort of wrap it up when that portion seems to close. The one thing I'll add before we really get started is that this is all of our opinions. So we try to bring a wealth of experience, but everyone's going to have different experiences and different opinions. So there's no gospel, right? These are our opinions. So like, hopefully it will help you. But you may hear advice that is different than what we would give. But we really don't have like an agenda, right? This is a nonprofit for everyone who wants to be in this field or is in this field to be as helpful as possible. All right. So prepping for the interview, I think that this is pretty important, but I have done enough talking. So I will see who else wants to sort of like set the stage for prepping for the interview, because I could go on about this for a while, but I will turn it over to some other folks.
Lee, do you want to go first? Okay. I would, if you don't mind me skipping to the prepare your stories, because that's my favorite part. I know I'm going out of order, but that's okay. Um, show up with a notebook. I never leave home without it, and uh, have a few of your questions already written down. Don't be afraid while they're talking to be writing your notes to think of. I blame it on being Italian, but I'm famous for interrupting. It's also because I'm about to forget what I was going to say. So instead of being an interrupter like me, have your notebook. It also shows an interest, right, while they're talking. And be ready with stories, particularly and especially when they ask you a question that you don't know or you don't think you know the exact technical answer to, because you can change it into a personal conversation where you say, I don't know exactly how to do that particular thing, but let me give you an example of when I was doing something similar and walk them through the entire story. And what you're then inviting them to do is connect to you personally, relate to a similar thing that they may have experienced. And also, it invites them into your problem solving style or your working style while you say, and when this happened that I wasn't expecting, then this other thing happened. And now in the future, I do it this way and this way. And maybe have those, 3 or 4 good stories kind of jotted down before you get started. So right away, I thought that was one of my favorite things to talk about.
Yeah. Lee, I know we talked about tell us a little bit about yourself. We had a little conversation about that. I don't know if you would want to sort of comment or talk about that a bit, because that kind of sets the stage.
Yeah, sure. So it's really funny, right? Because we all know that we should practice preparing your stories, the types of questions. A lot of people immediately gravitate to those technical questions. They'll start telling me how they're going to practice for like systems design or threat modeling or trivia type questions. And the one that really trips people up is tell us a little bit about yourself. Like either people are too brief and can barely tell you anything that you can grasp onto as an interviewer, or they just go on and on and on. And suddenly you're like, okay, so we're 40 minutes in and I need to ask you, it's never quite that bad, but people will go on and that gets awkward, right? Because you really want them to shine. But at the same time, like you do have questions you need to ask them as an interviewer. So like I look at it as an elevator pitch. Like if you can get it like 90 seconds, like that's awesome. If you need a couple more minutes, that's totally fine. But like you want to keep it brief. And you can always end it with like, I'd love to tell you more about, like, is there anything, that you want to learn more about? And like leave that open for the interviewer to really dive deep. But yeah, that one, and I'll be really transparent. I'm horrible at this question to this day. Like I think it's one of the hardest questions out there. And it gets harder the more experience you have because you're trying to figure out what do you actually tell someone that's important, but it doesn't bore them to tears. So yeah, we talked a lot about it. Maybe some further thoughts.
Yeah, I have plenty of thoughts, but I want to get Danielle to weigh in first on some of her thoughts for some of these important sort of first stage sorts of things. So go ahead, Danielle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when you talk about confidence and memorableness, um, some of that is about preparing your stories and telling about yourself. I mean, if you want to be memorable, then pick a story that's really impactful. Pick a story that's going to be unique to you and stay with your interviewer long after the interview happens. Preparation also will exude confidence. So if you have a bulleted list of points, I've told people time and time again, like, write out an outline for yourself. I mean, even if you have to look at it during the interview, your interviewer will be impressed that you are, preparing yourself and giving yourself a roadmap. And because I've noticed, when people give long pauses and when they ramble and they just give you a blank stare, on a video conference, or even in person, that doesn't really give your interviewer a big sense of confidence. So it just being prepared and practicing with yourself and just coming up with those stories like we've talked about will help not only to be memorable but also give that confidence air. Even if you don't feel confident during the interview, it will help you mechanism to help you get through the interview.
Yeah, I think those are important points. Um, and I think some of the things that I would say I see candidates do where they could improve is this happened a couple weeks ago where the person was started with like, I was born in Minnesota, and my first thought was like, oh no, like this is gonna be an entire biography. It quickly turned around because they only spent like 7 seconds on like, and then I moved here, and then we were in Virginia, and then I joined the military, and I was like, oh good, like but like that so like you don't want it to be like your whole life story because you want it to be like 90 to 120 seconds maybe. And then I love the point about if there's anything I didn't cover or anything that you want me to go deeper into, I can, right? Because maybe you say something and they're like really curious about that. Or maybe you don't say something that was on the resume that they ask about. I just interviewed somebody who was a former national football player and Canadian football player, mostly because he was a football player and I wanted to hear what he had to say. The resume was so. But I asked him about that experience. He was not well prepared for the interview, though, unfortunately. But you want to be memorable, right? So that was also like that was memorable to me on the resume, and then like, but the memorability didn't come out in the story much at all either. So, any other final comments on this slide from anyone?
If it's okay, I just have a couple things that popped in my head. Um, think about when you have your requirements in your mind, right? Because they want you. Think about what matters to you, and being who you are and being accepted for who you are is wicked important, right? So I've read a million times, hey, you gotta wear blue and you have to put your hair down and la la la, right? John, you have a mohawk. It's okay. It's okay to be who you are, because imagine if I've people have heard me say this, but if you show up to all your first dates pretending to be someone who you aren't, then all those relationships are going to fail, right? So, my last interview, my hair was purple, right? They either wanted me or they didn't. That's who I am. And I'm not saying drop an F bomb unless it's just naturally who you are, right? There's going to be a place that accepts you for who you are. So dress for success, but be who you are. So I probably wouldn't show up in a hoodie like I'm wearing right now, but it's okay to be yourself. I also just wanted to quickly state with regard to, I'm a rambler, as you can see right now. Um, I bet you in every room of engineers and every room of infosec people, there's a good 9 out of 10.5 that have we're all relate to or have some neurodivergent things that we are coupling with on a day-to-day basis. And if you catch yourself distracted, if you catch yourself rambling, if you catch yourself going from thought to thought to thought, um, own it. Say, you know what? I got really interested in something else, and here's who I am, and I care about what I was saying, and can we get back to that? Or, oh, I just had another thought about that thing. Just literally be who you are, because they probably can relate as well. So, they oughtn't assume their responsibility shouldn't be taken for granted, where they think they mustn't be, interested because they maybe stared off into space or something like that. So, I think that especially in the Diana group, we're surrounded by people who are a bit more understanding, and our community is as well.
Yeah, those are great points, and we may come back to visit some of those again later on, perhaps. So I have some thoughts around all of that too. So, so next slide is really the purpose of the interview, and we're kind of talking to this from like the recruiting side, right? From the hiring manager side or from the recruiting side. And like as a hiring manager, if I've already said I want to talk to you, to the candidate, then I am really interested in, can you do the job and do I want you on my team? Right? Those are the two things. Do I think you can do the job and do I want you on the team? But I'd be interested in, making sure everybody else can comment on sort of like these points, that the candidate should be thinking about as they prepare for the interview. So Lee, did you want to go first here?
I was actually thinking about it from the first point, like what's the purpose of the interviewer from the person who's interviewing, right? And so, like, I think with the recent layoffs, we have to be aware that it's going to be very different for people, right? It's going to be very different for someone who's, employed doing a passive search, who doesn't need to find anything and is just, looking for that super like unicorn position that they really want, versus someone who's either been laid off or is in a toxic work situation and they desperately need to get out. Um, you got to remember though, like that can be expressed in the interview, right? So you want to be like super prepared for like how to handle questions like whether you've been laid off or, you know, like why you're looking. And just remember to be like calm and like collected, like all the stuff we said on the first slide, because what you don't want to do is bring sort of that angst and anxiety into the room. But I think everybody understands it, from the other side of the table too. So I just want to call those things out.
Yeah, and this is where maybe we can get some conversation on this point earlier is, depending on your situation, right? If it's a casual interview and you're maybe looking for something, but you're fairly comfortable where you're at, right? Might be different if like, rent's due and I've been laid off and I don't have a job and it's been 45 days. I don't know that overall your approach necessarily will change. But I think that there are things that, you want to make sure that you're still confident and energetic, right? Right. Because that energy or difference can come through a little bit depending on like your demeanor, whether it's in person or on video. But let me turn it over to others for their comments on all of this.
Yeah, John, I would say absolutely that the energy is so important, especially depending on your situation. Because if you go into an interview and your goal is just to get the job, just get any job, and you can't express enough energy or interest and engagement in what they're looking for, then there might be a disconnect there between you and the interviewer, because they may feel like you're not super excited about the position, or that you're not really, um, your skill set might not match. So if really need to bring the energy and engagement, regardless of the job, and make sure that you speak to all of the skills that match up with what they're looking for, in order to show them that you really want that opportunity, versus I just need a job, any job, please give me the job, because I think everyone can be sympathetic and empathize with those situations too, but they also want to find someone that's excited to be there and excited to start supporting and come on board. So that's just something to be mindful of when you're trying to walk that line of, wanting to make sure you can support yourself, but also making sure the interviewer can see that in you, you'll be a great hire.
The only point I wanted to add is that the way that I run my recruiting team, the approach that I took when I was recruiting is, in the very beginning, it was all about the rec, and I trained my team to not recruit based on the requisition on their desk at all. It's a human-based matching game, so you don't need to be responsible for knowing what every other recruiter has on their desk, and just like any manager can't know what every other manager is doing, but you're supporting the community, you're supporting the candidate, become their advocate. I say, remember Jerry Maguire, like, what can I do for you? So be that way, be their advocate. And just start talking to them about themselves. So if I'm talking to a candidate, look for a recruiter who is going to treat you that way, who is going to ask you things about yourself more than they ask you things that will match you into that job. So if they're interested in finding out about you and give you the opportunity to talk about what does interest you, the things you want to learn, the types of projects that you like, tell them those things, because then they're going to start envisioning you on certain teams, and hopefully they'll start matching you into those places. What you may not fit for XYZ rec on their desk, but if they're doing their job well, they're going to help you find the right spot with or within their company and throughout the community.
That's a great point. And let me add something in here, especially for those of us at larger companies. We may be interviewing you. So I work at Booz Allen Hamilton, and so does Danielle. We're coworkers. We may have a specific rec on our team, but we are also considering you as a hire for the whole firm of 30,000 people now, right? So we do capability hiring, and like if you might not be a fit for this specific thing, right? Maybe it's contractual or something, right? In the way the DoD has written the contract, and we're not going to be able to get you into that role, right? There may be plenty of other roles on our team that we consider you for. And I don't have the job rec when I'm interviewing. I have like a list of questions I'm interested in to kind of help guide me, but I don't have the specific rec because we can consider you to be hired into the firm as well. Okay. Anybody have any final points on this slide, or we will go on? All right.
Can Danielle see the slides? I think she has a laptop in the car, right?
Yep, I can see them.
Okay.
Okay,
I
perfect.
was gonna text them to you on the side. Okay.
All right. So this is where we're going to talk about some of the technical questions, because I think a lot of candidates worry about this the most, and maybe they should, depending on the role. But I think equally important will be the things we cover in the next slide. But it seems like this is what a lot of the candidates worry about. So, there's a lot of resources available on potential technical questions for potential job roles. But I'm going to turn it over to everybody else to get their comments, and then maybe I'll wrap this up. But this is not the only part of the interview you should be preparing for. So, who wants to go first?
So I can go first. So actually, like for me, when I think about preparing for the technical screen, I actually usually ask the recruiters for as much detail as humanly possible, right? Because I want to understand, like when you think about information security, it's so broad, right? There are so many things that could be covered. I want to prepare correctly. A lot of times I'll ask, like, is there a whiteboarding? Like, am I going to have to code? By the way, if the answer is yes, I usually say I don't want to do that and pull out. That's just me. Is it threat modeling? Is it like more like, like OWASP top 10? Like I come from a background in AppSec. So I'm trying to like tease out what it might be. Is it systems design? And so like I try to ask as many questions as I can of the recruiter so I know what to prepare for, because it's just too broad otherwise. I just kind of want to touch on that I don't know that question. I remember I was sitting through an interview and I was getting like question after question after question about a cloud provider. Like, what does this cloud service do? What does this cloud service do? How would you configure that? How would you do? And I was like, after a while, I was like, I don't know that specific service. I don't even remember what we hit. Maybe it was like AWS Macy. I'm using that as an example. I don't actually even remember which one it was. And I was like, here's, how I approach understanding, AWS services, and here's, how I would answer that question. But if you want an answer right now, I don't have one. But like, let me tell you how I get an answer for you. And I think it's really important to be able to explain how you're going to get an answer to someone. No one expects you to know everything. There's way too much. There's just like way too much. But tell them how you'd get the answer. Like, don't just be like, I don't know, and drop the ball. So that are my thoughts on technical questions.
Thanks, Lee. Danielle, did you want to weigh in next on this one? Oh, are you still there, Danielle? All right, maybe we lost her. She is in the car.
She might be in a tunnel. The the closer she gets to where she's going, she might be in a tunnel. I wanted to say, first of all, Lee, what a great point you made. I hope I always remember that. Here's how I get the answers to the things I don't know. That's excellent. One of the, I don't know about you all, but sometimes there's a moment in my career when I had the opportunity to answer a question that I really did have a good answer for, and it was an executive asking me the question. And when I froze in the moment, even though, for the rest of my life driving down the road, I'll be like, this is what I should have said. I said, I don't know, but, and they cut me off and said, well, that's not acceptable. And I appreciate that they were like, I mean, it's your job to know the answer, right? So what my go-to now, and I said, it's okay. I pause and remember to say it. I say, here's what I do know, right? So instead of saying, I don't know that, but I switched it, or I switch it now. I screwed up the first time, but I say, here's what I do know. And I roll right into the thing that shows that I at least have a familiarity with what they're asking. And it helps you have that moment that you might need to go into comfortably talking about the thing that you're familiar with.
Let me also chime in here for a minute. Is that not all people on your interview panel are good? I've been in a lot of interviews with a lot of people who are terrible at asking questions. So you are also fully entitled to say, as you're taking notes, which you're allowed to do, whether it's in person or remote, can you just go over that one more time or rephrase that or reframe that? Because there are people that I interview with who will ask a very long-winded question, and sometimes I'm not even sure what the actual question was, right? Because they're making some sort of point in the question, and then by the time they get to the question, as another person on the interview panel, I'm not even sure what the question was, right? So please don't be afraid to also ask someone to rephrase or reframe the question or just state it one more time to make sure I got that right. Or you can restate it. I just want to double check. You're asking me if I know about Chinese advanced persistent threat actor activity in the last quarter. Is that correct? Right. And then they can either say yes or no or whatever it was. Danielle, I think hopefully you're back with us. I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in on some of these points.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
I was just saying I could talk about this for hours, but it's all about the art of the pivot and not panicking. And so if they ask you about China and you don't know anything about China, then tell them, I'm not really, I don't really know that much about these Chinese issues, but I could tell you all about Russia. So let me tell you about that, and really, really pivot on your strengths. And it's okay to, like others have said, admit that you're not sure about something. And even that, one recent interview we had, the person said, I have some homework to do. And they kind of were, showing that they could handle that and that they acknowledged that they had a gap there. But, I think it's just remain cool, and also don't Google it live in the interview, something to avoid, because if you start to give the appearance that you're Googling things, people will notice that and that won't give the best impression. Much better to have a prepared answer and be able to pivot from that than to do something like try to look it up while you're trying to respond. So those are my tips.
Yes. I was going to bring up the same point, but we were in that same interview. So, yeah. Don't try to do that. It's not a good look. Okay. And again, if anybody who's watching has any questions, please post them into YouTube. If you really don't want to put them on YouTube, I'm sure you could like hit me on, Twitter DM, and I'll check when we wrap this up then. So, as much as the technical questions seem to be what everyone focuses on from the candidate's point of view, in a lot of cases, that's fine. Bring your strengths, but please practice these other portions of the interview depending on what you want to call them. They will be called a number of different things. Fit questions, team fit, culture fit is still something that's used quite a lot in the terminology, but the non-technical questions. And I am going to kick this off with Lee with the STAR methodology, which I learned about as we were making this slide, and I really like that though.
Yeah, STAR is one of those really great methods for answering these types of questions. You may get a behavioral question like, tell me about a time when, or you can get like a situational question like, they present a situation, ask how you'd handle it, right? But STAR works really well for behavioral questions. I think it also sets you up for a lot of success for answering the question, in so much that you set the stage. So you talk about the situation, you talk about what you did, like what your task was, what your actions were. And that's really critical because I think, we're all on teams. We all think about how do we work as teammates and how do we do teamwork. But like in an interview, you really need to talk about what you did, right? So that's why STAR is so awesome that way. And then result, like what happened. And that is, not just your work, but the whole thing. And like being able to explain the impact of your work is huge. And so often people just glow right over it. They'll just tell you a situation, task, action, and they forget to talk about like what the impact was. And so if you can nail this methodology, I think it just sets you up for so much more success for these questions.
Yeah, Kirsten, I would love to get your thoughts on some of this.
I think that sometimes when you get asked these types of questions, and this is an opportunity for you to switch it back a little bit, like and say, here's a little bit about me, how about you? See if they're going to give you some information back about themselves. You can turn it into a work type thing. You can turn it into a problem that you solved, or a situation that you're in frequently at work, with a team situation, or we do something every week at the office. Do you have anything like that here? Have you had a similar experience? So make sure you give your interviewer an opportunity. I hope I'm not skipping to another slide, but give your interviewers an opportunity to tell stories back to you as well. It's going to help. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you.
Yeah, we will cover that a little bit, but
Sorry.
no, it's fine. Some of the slides are repetitive already because we talked about some of the stuff on the bottom part already. Danielle, when you're on the hiring panel and we're asking these non-technical questions, like what is it that you're trying to gauge, from the point of view of like making a hiring decision?
So I would say that really looking for the process. How are you handling a situation? What is your critical thinking? How do you handle your day to day? And then how do you handle something that's outside the norm of that day to day? And so it's all about kind of understanding kind of the environment based on whatever the job or the industry is. Maybe there's something very specific there, and they want to know you can kind of navigate that. And many different stakeholders and players, depending on the job as well and the role that you will have to deal with, especially if it's a leadership or a managerial position. They're going to want to know, some of those situations you've been in and the process, the line of thinking that you went through to handle that. So I think it's really just about, understanding that, and then also the cultural fit that, like others have noted. Do you seem to be having those characteristics where you'll be able to handle that role? or the level of responsibility that they want to place on you. So by bringing up those situations and the results and the actions, that will give a flavor of, that. And also being able to articulate that goes back to that confidence, that we talked about earlier. So a lot of these things overlap and align, but being able to do a situation like that will confidence that they're asking you to do at a behavioral and cultural level.
I also want to jump in here because I talk to and mentor people who aren't in cybersecurity, who want to be in cybersecurity. Maybe they're a student, they're a mid-career pivot, they're a veteran, right? You're re-entering the workforce after a period of time. Those are a lot of the types of people that we also get with the Diana Initiative in particular, right? Students, people trying to get into cybersecurity from another field, women who have left the workforce for a period of time. It's mostly women. It's not always true though, right? So I feel like this is your time to shine because you can bring in stories from other disciplines. So like you may get questions around like tell me about a challenging situation or something, or tell me about a time you had to overcome difficulties at work, right? There's all manner of things that we can ask that. And I think if like you were a student or you're from a different discipline trying to get your first cybersecurity job or your first IT job, you can use examples from beyond work, right? You can say, well, there's ways you can answer that question because they might say, tell me about a time at work, X, Y, and Z. And you can say, well, I have a really good experience at, when I was doing this final project with a team, as a graduate student, or, well, when I was actually working, in this other field, right? So I think if you prepare your stories, strengths, weaknesses, overcoming challenges, why are you interested in this position? Why are you getting into cybersecurity? All of those are things you can kind of prepare for. So I just wanted to get anybody else to sort of comment on those thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in interviews before where asking them, why are you interested in this role or this industry if they're making a change? And they haven't been able to really articulate that basic question. And so that is something I would over prepare for to make sure that you can, because sometimes it can be so broad and it can be a complicated answer, depending on what the role is. But you have to also prepare for those very simple questions that you might not think about in advance, um, to be able to say, explain like why you're making that big change from one career to another, or maybe why after a long break you feel you're ready for that role if you're diving back in to that career field. So I just want to underscore that because I have seen that happen, and it's kind of unfortunate, but I think that if you just take that time to really articulate it. And again, I would say if you have to write it out and have it in front of you, um, just do that. Like it's always better to be prepared like that and be able to have the answer than to kind of blank if you're put on the spot. So that would be my advice.
I have a thought that I want to mention before I forget it as well. So this has happened several times, which is why I want to talk about it. Someone's trying to break in or pivot. Maybe they're in IT and they're trying to get in cybersecurity, or they're like slightly changing specializations, and they say something like, "I am a lifelong learner," and they haven't done jack to demonstrate that they're actually a lifelong learner. They can't answer my podcast question. They haven't gotten any certification. They haven't done any training. They're actually not doing. So, like, conceptually, if you're going to say something like, I'm really interested in this field, I'm really eager to get into this, I'm excited to learn a lot of stuff, but you haven't actually done, and it's not articulated, and you can't articulate, and it's not on the resume, that you're actually interested or doing any of those things you just told me you're doing, I will pick up on that quite clearly, because for a lot of those positions, I want someone who's really interested and eager and a lifelong learner and is, doing the Udemy's and Hack the Box and CTS and B-Sides and DEF CONs. And if you tell me that, And then like when I say, can you explain to me some of the things you're doing? And then there's awkward silence, that pretty much answers that question for me as a hiring manager.
You just triggered me or motivated me or inspired me to tell a teeny baby story about when I was at a Veterans Initiative Summit, and I was in this room at the Chamber of Commerce, chock full of people in these amazing uniforms, and I was so impressed, and I felt so humbled and unworthy to be there, and they were all looking at me to help them with their resumes and help them interview and things like that. And I thought, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to pick this moment and see what happens. And I said, did you all bring your resumes? And you heard papers crinkling and papers crinkling. And I went, put them away, they suck, like just to get their attention and like set the mood. And these are like, officers in the military and stuff. And they were like, whoa, like, what did she just say? And then I said, just kidding. I'm gonna pick 3 volunteers out of the office. You. You're gonna come up here, and I'm gonna ask you specific stories. And I'm gonna say, tell me a time when you did this thing. Tell me a time when you did this thing. Tell me a time when you did this thing. And then I'm gonna be writing down the skills that I've decided that you demonstrated when you told your story. And then I'm going to challenge you to flip back your resume back over. And I bet you don't have those things, those problem solving skills, those leadership skills, those requirements gathering skills that I gathered from your story. Right. And sure enough, I just lucked out that day. Sure enough, I identified really important things. I translated from what they had done to what I was looking for or pretending to look for in this mock interview, what they didn't articulate about themselves. So think about those stories. Think about the things that you're proud of. Think about the things that you've accomplished either with a team member. That's important too. Don't feel like you have to say I was a rock star every day, every day, every day. A lot of times we don't need rock stars as much as we need people who can help the band get together, right? Um, so tell the story. If you're the one on the cowbell, that makes it work, right? That's important. So think about what those things that you look back at and you're proud of that you did. Think about that story, be ready to tell it, and then challenge yourself. And everybody on this panel is available to help you. If you want to tell us a story, we will tell you some skills out of that. We will tell you some key things that you're going to want to highlight on your resume and in your interview based on what you have done in your career journey. I just
I love
volunteered
that.
you all.
I love that. The bullet on here. So I think this is important regardless of your level, but I'm going to focus on more junior folks, right? Because more junior folks, I have some. I realize you will probably maybe need more training. That's not always true, right? There's some of you rock stars out there, but generally, more junior people are going to need more on the job training, whether it's technical or non technical. But are you valuable to me and my team for this role? And all of these things we're kind of discussing are the ways you can also show you are valuable, other than just your ability to code or be an architect or configure the cloud service or write a threat intel report, right? And that is actually how you'll stand out from all of the other people that also know how to code and secure the firewall and like answer the SOC help desk ticket, right? Because apparently now there's a lot of people who are suddenly finding themselves in the job market, right? So it's this aspect that you'll want to make sure you prepare these stories so that you stand out, so that I understand why you're valuable to the team beyond just the technical skills that you do bring to the table.
And one thing I wanted to add before we move on, we say tell them about yourself and why you're interested in this position. And you may not always get this question, but one of the things that I always find amusing is when you ask somebody why you're interested in this position, and they can tell you everything about the position, but what they never mention is why the company. And like that's the perfect opportunity to show that you've researched the company, you understand like their values and what they're interested in, how those align with yours. And like it's such an easy question. And yet so many people just go straight for like, well, this is why I want to be a architect. This is why I want to be a pen tester. Like they just totally forget to include why the company. And that matters if someone's asked you that question. So like easy to prepare for and just like make sure you get an answer for that.
I love this, and I will tell one little story, and then we're going to move to the next slide. Is if you come to my interview and you call it Bose Allen twice, that tells me you probably don't know much about Booz Allen Hamilton, especially if you ask me if Booz Allen Hamilton is the same company as Booz Allen, versus someone who's like, I've always been interested in Booz Allen. You have such a good reputation. You're really well known in the consulting firm, right? Two very different impressions left in my mind as the hiring manager. So I love that fact, and I think it's really important. Probably even more important at a smaller company, maybe, than at a big company, because the big companies, like, are fairly well known. But if you're like a smaller company and you've done your research, that could be really valuable, I think. Next slide. All right, everything seems to be remote for me right now. So I'm going to start off with one, and I think I ended up deleting this on LinkedIn because it was getting a lot of hate mail. I hope my recruiters at my company are telling people to be on camera. And I will tell you why I think that this is important, if it is at all possible, if it's possible. I only have either that 30 or 60-minute time slot to make a connection with you, right? So there's like non-verbals, right? Can I see that you're engaged? Can I see that you're energetic? Can I tell that you're not Googling the answer? Like, I'm not trying to make a value judgment on what you look like, which is how people interpreted this when I put this on LinkedIn like months ago. But like, if I can't see you, I think, and you're not on camera, I think it is more challenging to be memorable. So I will leave it there and see what everyone else thinks.
I just want to add I don't disagree with you. I just want to add a different point of view that not everyone's comfortable, especially recently. I've even found people who know each other in meetings are just we're just we're all kind of a little uncomfortable, right? Even interacting right now. It's just a time when we need to be a little bit patient with people's discomfort. Um, and I've tried to. I was talking to a manager one day who was, why wouldn't they get on camera? And I'm like, I don't know. Danielle's in the car right now. Like I have people who have to like get out of their skiff and go out to the parking lot, and they're on their phone. And I mean, so everybody's circumstance is different. So if you are in a circumstance like that, so that the people on the other side don't feel like you don't care enough to engage, or whatever the case may be, it's okay to explain it, because if you're going to tell them about yourselves, right, we keep going back to talking about yourself. Do that, right? Hey, sorry, I'm not on camera at the moment. I look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully someday soon. um, it's not a it's not the right circumstance at the moment for me to be, maybe just, I don't know, just say my camera's not working. Say what you got to say, like, really. If you aren't camera ready, it's okay, I think. But speak to it so that they don't make a bad, so that they don't assume that you didn't care enough to get camera ready that day. um, just to clear up anything that might be assumed, if that's fair.
I love that. My advice is, if you can't be on camera, it's worth the 2 seconds to be, just even if you don't say specifics, like, I'm sorry, I can't be on camera right now, or I can't be on camera at this location, right? And then you've acknowledged it. And then I sort of cross off my little note that says not on camera, on camera. And we all have biases, and maybe we'll talk about this when we get to the questions and answers. But I'm going to throw one out there that I'm aware of, that I have this bias. So I'm aware of it. Okay. If you're applying for my technical role and your excuse is I couldn't get the web camera to work, or I couldn't understand the software, I know I have a bias on that, and I know it can be very complicated, and everybody doesn't have all the right equipment and etc. But I tried not to be judgmental around that, right? But this is one of the reasons why we do encourage people to try, if you can, ahead of time. See, like, are they on WebEx, or are they on Teams? They're using Google Meet. Now, I know everybody can't check that ahead of time, but it is helpful, because I know if I have that kind of bias in my mind, other people could in this field as well.
It's smart of you to acknowledge that. And I think what we might have just discovered live here together is just take 2 seconds. You don't have to tell them why. You don't have to say I had a bad day or a bad night. You can just say, sorry, I'm not on camera. I recognize that I should be, and I look forward to meeting you in person someday. There you go. Check, check.
I know, at least for some of my interviews, it became I try to do video based on what the other person's doing. Like I take cues from other ones, like other people, right? And sometimes we would just get on briefly to like say hello and see each other and then go dark. And that worked because it felt like a good connection, right? So I try to take cues is kind of the way I've done it. But I agree, like if there's a reason you can't be, like maybe there's chaos at your house, or like my house is under construction and maybe I feel uncomfortable. Obviously I don't right now, but maybe I would feel uncomfortable if I was interviewing. Um, or I would just call it out, probably knowing me. But I think that's fine. Like just be honest about it. Like, really sorry, can't do that right now. I really love the like I'm looking forward to meeting you one day. Like I think that's such a phenomenal way to like cut any sort of awkwardness around that. So I think that's brilliant.
I'm going to let Daniel take her turn, but this just reminds me of Google. Go ahead and Google this later. Right when COVID started, and I didn't have anything good connectivity stuff at home, and Kathleen Smith did a panel, and she was like, "How to do video interviews at home," and straight the whole time it was like it was rehearsed. My dog was barking. The doorbell was ringing. Like it was absolute chaos. I was having to use the camera on my phone. It fell. So yeah. Here you go. Don't do that.
Yeah, I would just add for the dress appropriately. Don't fall into the trap of, let's say you're doing an interview and the hiring managers come on screen and they're dressed in hoodies, and you're dressed to the nines. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that the interview is suddenly more informal because your hiring managers didn't dress up either. I've seen that, and I just want to caution you to then treat the interview as more informal, because chances are your hiring managers are just going about their day to day, and they're looking for you to be providing that dressing appropriately and showing you're serious. So just an interesting kind of perspective there, as far as how everyone is appearing in video when you're conducting the interview. So
I also want to jump in here real quick too with two real brief stories. Is we ended up interviewing a candidate who was in the gym because there was like a miscommunication about the timing, and we were like totally willing to reschedule it. Like, I mean, whatever, it's fine. But he killed it. He killed the interview from the gym, like absolutely just hit it out of the park. And then I've also recently had someone who clearly was in a food court. I'm thinking military based food court, and I could hear all of the background noise. He did well enough that we offered him the job, but it was not the best impression. Like, even if you walked outside on your phone, then I would say, like, just be like, hey, I can't be on video right now. I'm in the middle of my day, or I just walked outside, or I'm on my lunch break, rather than trying to be on video in the middle of a food court, which was very awkward. So, like, I think, like, again, like, if you kind of explain it, if you're not in a location or can't be on video, I'm not going to hold it against you. I just think, like, if it's possible, it helps you make the connection. I think in a lot of cases. But anyway, I think we've probably killed this slide now. So I will talk about this for all day. So I'm interested to hear what other people say about all of this, about things to maybe not say or not speak to. I've spoken to this quite a lot in my role at VetSec, with what veterans maybe should not put on their resume or say. But let me hand it over. Danielle, do you want to start this one off?
I kind of agree with you, John, about we could talk about this all day long. I think talking poorly about your previous jobs and coworkers is probably not the best thing to do, because even if you had a bad experience, even if it was not your fault, I would try to take away from those negative experiences like the positives of what you learned and how you grew professionally from those experiences. So you can allude to challenges and issues that you overcame, but I would really avoid saying outright bad things about your prior companies or your colleagues. because you never know. First of all, you never know what bridges you're going to burn. You never know what connections the company you're interviewing at might have to your prior company. Especially, I'll say this, in the consulting world, that is a huge no-no. I would definitely not do that. A lot of people jump companies all the time, and you really never know who has those connections. But that's the big one, I would say. So I could talk about it for another hour, but I will pass it to someone else.
Lee, do you want to jump in next?
Yeah. So we all have experiences outside of work, right? That we do, that we're passionate about, we care about. Um, the problem is you just don't know like the person who's interviewing you, like what their views on things are. So in general, I just try to avoid anything that might be they may have a different view on. And that's this whole like litany list of stuff that you have. Like I just and that's just me. Like, I don't even want to talk about this with my coworkers. Like, I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to talk about sports. I don't want to talk about religion. Like, there's just things I don't want to talk about with people that I work with. And again, that could just be me. I know plenty of people at work will have those kinds of conversations. But I think in an interview, you just really want to shine. So if you are going to use something, just make sure it's like a really solid example and it definitely like lends like the interviewer to see you in the best possible light. If you think it's even partially controversial or could be interpreted the wrong way, I would just say don't do it. Um, and someone was asking about the how to avoid a question that is illegal or inappropriate, and I would actually love other people's view on this. I can give you a very short story. I was interviewing for this company, and I'd walked like they'd walked me through, and I noticed there were like no women there, which was really weird for at the time to me. And in the middle of the interview, or like the VP was like, "Well, so when are you gonna have kids? Because like we'll have to plan for like your maternity leave." And I was just like, I don't even know like what. I don't think you can ask me. Like I was so offended. I don't even know what I said back. But like for me, that was a total turnoff. Like I was obviously not going to accept that job. Besides the fact there were no other women, which I mean, I guess as I said, that should have clearly in there was a problem. I'm never going to say who this company was. It was horrifying, and it was the first time I'd actually had dealt with something that I thought was blatantly like inappropriate or illegal. Because I was noticing that someone on uh, YouTube is asking about like how to handle like ageism, and this is a really interesting question to me. You know, like I don't have a good answer, so I'm wondering if anybody else does. Because as I said, I mostly just tell people I'm insulted and walk out of things. I don't recommend that.
Lee, can I just say that I guess I won't say the name of the company either, but it was three men and me. It was a panel interviewing me, and one of them, also an executive, was looking over the resume, and this makes sense. They saw a gap, and they wanted me to explain the gap, and I said, "Well, that was when I had my son." And he then said, "How many kids do you have?" And I was like, and I was like, "Do you just want to write me the offer?" Like, I literally said, "Right now, I'm expecting an offer now." So, yeah. So, I'm just sad that that's so common. Um, I would think of on topics to avoid. Um, it's kind of like the purple hair thing I said before. Think about what matters to you. Think about what do they need to know about you that is important to you. So stick to the job stuff. But if there's something that's very important to you, if there's something that happens every Tuesday that you need to make sure that they're going to be okay with, let them know. You don't have to say that it's, on Tuesdays I cut off chickens' heads. You don't have to get too weird about it, but you can say, I have a thing I do at 3 o'clock on Tuesdays. Is that going to be okay with you? You don't have to say it's I drive my kids to soccer, but if that's what it is, you can say that. So don't be afraid to be the human that you are, because they all claim, like all the big companies with all their little value statements, claim that they have a work-life balance, virtue. So test it out, and then say maybe that's when you ask them, do you have things that you have to do, or are they accommodating to you? So just keep it balanced.
I would like to address the question that perhaps also started this a little bit, about what year did you graduate? this probably goes back to why you're interviewing, because if I don't need this job, right? Like if I'm casually interviewing, it's a two-way interview. And if you pull some bullshit, then I'm done, right? That's different if I just got laid off and I need a job, right? So I think that really affects how you potentially want to like handle these situations, right? And I think that that's okay that we can talk about this. We can talk about as many controversial things as you want. Like put them into chat because I'll be here all day for this. Um, if somebody asked me what year I graduated, I'd be like, I don't see how that's relevant to the interview. And
Maybe
then
even say, why do you ask? Maybe because
right,
they're going to say, I went to that school too, or my brother went to that school, but if they don't have
right.
a good reason for asking, then the question just
Right.
should die
Oh,
right
because
there.
yeah, my second cousin went to WVU at the same time. I was wondering if you would have been there at the same time because such and such happened. I mean, and then it's like, oh, cool, yeah. But if they're trying to figure out how old you are, then you can say like, why? And if they don't answer, it's a pretty good idea that it's not relevant and they were trying to figure out your age. We get that question quite a lot for mid-career changers as well, or people who have a gap in employment for whatever reason. Um, there's also we had a question earlier when we were talking about the video interviews where somebody came on. I hear this all the time. This pisses me off as a hiring manager that the hiring manager is not on video at all, not even at the beginning. I think that's super weird. And like as a candidate, for me, it's a two-way interview. So like if you're being weird and awkward in the interview, how does that come across to the candidate? But again, lots of people are in hiring manager positions who also aren't good at their job. Maybe they're too busy, maybe they didn't think about it. I think a lot of people are multitasking. Like, let me tell you how I know that that's true. People are multitasking who are supposed to be listening to your answers to the questions. Um, I think you're right. Like if they don't have their camera on and you started with your camera on, then you can turn it off. I would probably be like, okay, I wasn't sure if cameras were going to be optional today, but I can see that we're not on camera. And then I would turn my camera off. But I that's how I'm going to roll. I don't necessarily recommend that strategy if like you're like in need of a job, right? I think that right can change right based on your position, and I just want to be clear about that like for me, if I'm casually interviewing or I'm potentially looking for a job, I think it's going to change the dynamic than if I'm going to be evicted, right? I think that can change how you want to handle some of this, and I just want to be honest about all of that. Let me tell one other real brief story that if you were a veteran and you attended sniper training in the Marine Corps, I don't necessarily recommend putting that you attended sniper training on your resume because a lot of veterans who want to include the fact they were overseas already elicit a lot of questions in the civilian population. And I don't know that saying you were a sniper, but again, is it relevant to the job? Like, do you have a story about that? The other thing is that all of this other stuff that's controversial, I put controversial stuff on my resume because I wouldn't want to work somewhere where that excluded me from getting an offer. But again, I am not in the position where I'm desperately looking for my next job because I have been laid off, right? So the fact I do public speaking and volunteer at VetSec and volunteer for the Diana Initiative, which is fairly left, right, from the political spectrum, frankly, right? If somebody read that was like, I don't want to interview John. He does all this crazy volunteer stuff. Then that's fine because that's a company I don't want to work for. But I'll pass the mic over to everybody else for all your other thought.
I have a kind of a cheeky question, I guess. If you're trying to avoid a question that's illegal or inappropriate, is it too blatant to respond by asking them what their company's non-discrimination policy is? Because I would want to ask that immediately if they were putting me on the spot for something that I thought was inappropriate, But that's just me. If I didn't care about the job after that, if I didn't want to work there, I would place for that kind of behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would, because in a lot of, if you're interviewing with a federal organization, a lot of times they have their HR person on the line as a requirement. That's been my experience when I was a hiring manager as a federal civilian. So like that, I might say that at that instance. But again, I think it depends on the situation. I know that is a response I would consider.
Definitely to Melissa, I would say, um, just why do you ask? Like, what is the purpose of your question? Why do you ask? You all, Danielle did remind me of something that just from a previous slide, real quick. When someone can't speak to um, why this company, if you didn't do your homework, or if you don't actually have a specific why for the company, it's just another opportunity for you to invite them to tell you why. Why should I don't know, you tell me. Like, why are you here? Why did you come here? Why is it great? Why are you still here? What have you learned lately? Right? um, and in that moment, I mean, you're not being a jerk. In that moment, you're inviting them to answer the things that are important to you. When in and they and also that also tells them about you, right? If you're wanting to know what things that they've learned, or whether or not you've had training and things like that at your organization, what challenged you, then they now know what interests you. You're interested in learning, you're interested in being challenged. So just wanted to go to back to that for a sec.
Yeah, that's great. We've probably covered everything on this slide, so I'll go to the next slide. Just sort of uh, other advice, and I think we probably have talked about this a couple of times, right? Like, don't badmouth your previous employer. I have one example I sometimes use, but again, it would depend on the circumstances whether how much I would badmouth them. Um, but I think some people also ramble. We've talked about that a little bit. And I think if you find yourself rambling, just like come back. Like if you're giving a presentation and like you start to go down a rabbit hole, be like, sorry, I was going off a tangent on that. Let me bring it back to the question. And those 2 to 3 questions to ask, like we were just kind of discussing that. Like a lot of this is at the end of the interview. You might be asked, do you have any questions for us? What keeps you at this company? What keeps you motivated? This is your time to like get some of that two-way interaction. What challenges have you experienced here? There's all sorts of questions you can ask the panel while you have them there. And I think it kind of varies depending on what your priorities are. I would have 2 to 3, maybe 4 most. I had someone who was like 6 or 7 questions deep, and we knew after 5 minutes we weren't hiring this person anyway, so it was very painful. But like 7 or 8 questions is probably too many questions.
For the don't badmouth, the one thing that I just kind of want to call out is that sometimes you'll take a role, you've been told all these amazing things, and you've interviewed and you think it's great, and you go in and you realize it's just so not the role for you, right? Like, don't say like, oh, the company sucked and they, spun me a bill of goods. Just explain like, this really wasn't a fit, and here is why. So I have an example where that happened to me. Like, it really wasn't a great fit. And so when people ask, about it, I just say, oh, the job really just wasn't technical enough. And so I didn't get the kind of engagement that I need to be my best self and really deliver for the company. So it's not saying that that was the company's fault, or that, because I think it's a delightful company for most people. Just that role for me just was just a really truly terrible fit. But I think if you can explain like why in a very positive manner, that also signals what you're looking for, right? Like, so now future uh, hiring managers or employers can be like, oh, well, this person really cares about technical work, so I want to make sure that the position I have is technical enough. Um, the one thing about the prepared 2 to 3 questions, um, this probably won't happen to you, but in case it does, like I want you to be prepared. Sometimes you'll get an interview with like a VP or some other executive, and they don't want to all to do is ask what questions you have. Like, they may not actually interview you, right? It's all based on what you're going to ask them. So as you sort of get, like I would say, higher in your career, you should be prepared for those interviews, because that has happened to me, and it's fine. I have a whole host of questions I can just rattle off. I always have a bunch. It's just might as well. I mean, someone's just gonna like give me an hour to like pepper them with questions. Cool, I can like ask all kinds of stuff. But like I don't think it's gonna happen if you're junior. Like I don't remember ever happening previously in my career, but as I climbed, it is something I've seen more and more frequently. So, if you are more senior, I would say that like it's possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's definitely possible. So you just want to have as many questions as you can in case you ever do have that experience. The first time it definitely was, I was like, really? You have, like nothing for you, just okay, let's go. But it like I think if I hadn't just had a ton of different questions, that would have really thrown me off.
I like that we keep coming back to a lot of common themes, right? So as we run through all the things that you might be thinking about going into it, I think we touch on a lot of the same common themes throughout the slides, which is wonderful. It's about being yourself. It's about being prepared, um, and it's about being your own best advocate. And I love that this says everyone is nervous, like we were talking about at the very beginning. You know. About neurodivergence and maybe you do get distracted easily and maybe you're nervous about that. Maybe call it right out, you know, say oh sorry, I tend to tap my pen on the desk over and over and over again. I'm sorry, it's my thinking mechanism, um, don't be afraid to kind of call out the thing about yourself, um, I had someone that I was interviewing, and there was the wall behind me is all a window. And there's flags out in the yard behind me. Uh, Building on 28, you've all seen it. Lots of flags, lots of windows, and they're looking at me, and they're kind of looking past me and around me, and I thought, am I bothering you? Like what you're so not into this interview at all. And then it occurred to me, I actually could see the flags in the reflection on their glasses. And I went, Do you want to turn, like just kind of being aware of reading the room and being aware of kind of what they were going through too. Gosh, that must have been tough. That to make a tough situation tougher by, giving you all these distractions. And they really appreciated it. They were like, yeah, let's kind of resituate. So if you're distracted or if the lights are too bright or if the environment that they put you in, which by the way is another thing in the beginning that you could ask, especially with the recruiter. I think it was Danielle that was saying, tell them to, tell you what to expect in the beginning. Ask what the environment's going to be like. How many people are going to be in the room? What's the room going to look like? What is what am I walking into? That they should prepare you as well. So you know what to expect, and don't be afraid to say, I would be more comfortable here or like this.
Yeah, and I'll add a few things to this too. As I kind of said before, the don't read aspect of this, as a hiring manager, I would prefer you to read something that you prepared versus not have any answer at all or just stare at me blankly. So I will give you that caveat. I think, if it's a choice between not being prepared and not having an answer and reading something, I would just read it, and I would, as an interviewer, I would appreciate that more, that you at least prepared something to tell me. um, about being nervous. So really quick anecdote: I sing in a performing community choir, and I have often done, a solo or something like that. And I'm always super nervous, like to get up on stage and perform in front of people. But afterward, people always tell me that I don't look nervous at all, and I correct them. I'm like, no, I'm actually always very nervous. But it's all about how you cope with that feeling. So if you know that you're prone to that and that you could freeze up or just go blank, you know, um, that's where the preparation comes in. That's where your environment comes in. I know the earliest slides that John had in this slide deck, about eating something, being hydrated, sleeping well, like anything you need to make yourself feel less on edge and more comfortable in your environment will be helpful to you and help that confidence come across in the interview. Um, and the last point I just want to make is that, you know, if you don't know something and you're panicking, you feel like you're going to ramble to try to come up with some kind of answer, it's okay to again, when you're leaning on your strengths and pivoting there, engage the interviewer in that conversation. Ask them. I mean, I think Kirsten made this point earlier, where ask them to expand on that, or turn a question back to them about, have you seen this in your industry? And that kind of makes it a more engaging conversation. And those people who are interviewing you can start to see themselves working with you as a colleague, because you're able to spin up to their level and have that like adult conversation about that issue, even if you're not very knowledgeable about it. I love that last bullet. What challenges am I going to experience on that role? I think even as an interviewer or a hiring manager, that's a challenging question for us to answer. But I definitely think it's warranted, and that will help you build that conversation during the interview, because then you can kind of talk about that. Oh, I had a similar experience. Here's what happened. You can really align that, and all the stars will hopefully align for you. But yeah, I love that last bullet. I think that's a great question to ask. I'm going to put that one on my list.
I was gonna say the one thing about everyone is nervous. It's funny. Like I grew up as a competitive swimmer, and there's nothing more nerve-wracking than getting on the block and praying that you don't like have a false start. Like there's just a lot that goes through your mind, right? And I used to listen to like terrible music. Like I'll just be honest, it's truly terrible music. But I call it my hype music, right? It's the stuff that gets me excited. And like for me, it's what gets me in the zone. And to this day, I use it for everything. Before I go on stage to talk, I'm listening to hype music because people are trying to talk to me. And I'm just like, I can't, no, I got my hype music on. I'm ignoring you. And I do the same thing before interviews. I listen to hype music. I get to things that make me feel like energized and excited. And that works for me. But again, it's because I was a competitive swimmer. It's just like, that's my thing. But if there is something that brings you energy and excitement, like do that right before your interview, because that will really downplay your nervousness, like at least in my experience.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I think that's all good information, good tips. And if you're watching us and there's about 17 people or so, and you have any more questions, please put them in chat. We might do a quick break if anybody needs a break. But then we're really either going to try to answer questions from chat, or we're going to like sort of talk about some other things amongst ourselves until we get some questions coming in. So if anybody does need a break, that's fine. I am probably going to just push through. How's everybody feeling? Are we just going to push ahead? We good?
I'm gonna go be sick now. Is that okay?
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're not feeling well. I appreciate your
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I've had a fever for a couple of days. I love you guys. I love you people, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to participate.
Yeah. Thanks for your time. Feel better.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right. All right. I think we're just going to push ahead then. So we'll talk. And if we get some questions, we're going to answer it. If we don't get a ton of questions, at some point, we'll probably wrap up the stream. If you keep having questions for me, I'll stay here late. So I think we'll start with the first thing here, best practices. And I tweet, or you have the link to the slides. It's in the YouTube. That's just a Google slide. I swear it's not malware. It's just the slides. The slides have a lot of resources in them, including a resource that I found about like that's titled from this woman, which is fantastic, like how to cheat on your interview. And like one of the best practices she talked about is putting little note cards around your monitor, right? Because on a remote interview, we can't see that. So like if you want to make sure in your story you cover something, or like, like we don't want to put like detailed notes, like it's not the CISSP exam, but like if there's something you want to make sure you cover, or like when I talk about this role, I want to talk about this, or like, biggest strength, like, and with your keyword that you want to make sure you include, like you can totally essentially cheat. So I thought that was a fantastic best practice. I'm also a big proponent of taking notes as the candidate and asking people to rephrase their question, which I talked about earlier. But I've been in a lot of interviews where I, as the candidate, am not sure what the final question is. So I will ask them to reframe it or restate it, which also gives me time to think of an answer. So even if I did get the question, if I think it's a really important one, I might ask them to rephrase it while I think of an answer. If it's like one of the earlier, like maybe really critical ones that I know I want to get right, I will ask them to restate it. Lee, do you have any other like big best practices you want to cover?
I mean, I have to say, like, it's kind of funny how much interviewing virtually has sort of changed the paradigm, I think, in favor of candidates. Like, you can, to your point, like have post-it notes, or if you are okay with sticking stuff on your walls, just have, maybe the whiteboard is behind your computer. Just have the things like you want to emphasize because no one can see them, which is really interesting to me personally, just because like it feels very different than in person. It's interesting that you guys all mentioned taking notes. Like, I take a ton of notes, and it never occurred to me to do it in person. Like, it's never occurred to me. Now that I'm virtual, of course I take notes. Like, I need to know how to answer things, and it's really interesting, I think. I think that that one is just, for me, the best practice is, like, be comfortable on being on camera as much as you can, right? Like, practice, like, do, like, Zoom calls with people, like, if you don't like the camera. I'm not a huge fan of the camera, to be clear. Like, I in general avoid public speaking via like these type of events because I just know I'm not as on as I am when I'm on a stage. And I'm just aware of that, right? So being aware of your own kind of I guess weaknesses, if you will. Um, yeah, but I gotta watch this video because I just think that like that's brilliant advice, right? It makes total sense, and why not? It's not cheating either. It's just stuff that you've done. It's putting yourself in the best possible light. It's just taking advantage of the situation. So I think it's awesome.
Danielle, do you have any like big tips or best practices that you think are like pretty vital for a candidate that you want to share?
I love the idea of keeping your answers shorter and then kind of inviting your interviewer or hiring manager to ask you a follow-up question. Like, I want to hear more about X. I think that is such a smart thing to do because then you don't end up rambling on something that might not be relevant. But if you give just enough detail, if they want to hear more, they will ask you more about that, especially if it aligns with the skill sets for that role that you're interviewing for. But, I also think be aware of that when they're asking you a very broad question, right? Kind of a sky's the limit question on your answer. And it may be a broad question you didn't prepare for, right? So once you choose a road to go down, brevity, I would always lean on that because then if they want to know more about something that you said, they can ask that, or you can even say to your, interviewer, you know, does that does that align with what you were looking for? I'm happy to expand on that. Anything like that to keep the door open, but not, go too far outside the scope of maybe what they're looking for. So I would just say that, if you're getting a broad question about the role that you're interviewing for, to err on that side.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. The other thing that can do for you, if somebody's like, "Oh, tell me a little bit about your role, about your previous role, company X that I see here 2 years ago," and you might like summarize that in like 60 seconds. 60 seconds, right? Oh yeah, I was the technical SOC lead for the tier 2 SOC. We managed 25 people. We handled about 2,000 tickets a day. I kind of handled everything from X, Y, and Z technologies. Does that sort of answer your question? Did you want me to dive into any particular area? Because either they will want you to expand on something or you've answered the question. What candidates will do sometimes is talk about that for 5 minutes. A lot of my interviews are only 30 minutes long, right? So like I don't want a 5-minute answer for everything that we ask you because I'm only going to be able to ask you like 4 questions, right? So I think that advice is really good. Try to answer it succinctly and see if that covered the question, which also then starts to turn it into a conversation. So if you're the candidate and you can turn this into a conversation where you are also asking questions, that is probably the best thing I think you can do as a candidate. But I wanted to get everyone else's thoughts on that point in particular.
I mean, I think it's always best when it's a conversation, right? When it just sort of flows, but it doesn't always happen, right? Like sometimes there's just not the opportunity. Sometimes the interviewer just isn't going to do that. Even if you do try to throw back a question, they'll just be like, "Well, I have to move on to my next thing." Um, so I don't think it like obviously that's ideal, right? And I think those are the best interviewers, and those are the best interviews we walk away from. Like we feel really positive about those. But I also think like it just may not happen, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean you won't like get the job. Like I don't want people to think like, "Oh, the only way this is gonna go well is if I get a conversation going." There are plenty of times where it's just a, very much back and forth. But I agree, it's nice when you get those. They just feel way more positive.
Yeah, Danielle, I know we have been in a number of interviews, and in my experience, we're trying to see whether the candidate can do the job. But if it becomes a conversation, I think you and I in our little Teams chat off to the side kind of know pretty early how it's going. So I know as a hiring manager, I want to cover: do we think you can do the job? And then it's that interactivity. How articulate are you? I know sometimes candidates, I think sometimes they're really nervous, will give really short answers, right? So I might say something like an open-ended question about like, tell me some of the things you're doing to get into this field, right? What are some of the things you're doing? And like, it's like a really short answer. Like, well, I took Sec Plus and got certified. And it's like, okay, but like if you like there, so I think you're going to want to be mindful as the candidate of a more open-ended question versus a very like technical, like what it like there's people who ask really terrible questions about like ports and protocols, right? But it's like, oh, can you explain to me what DNS is, right? If that's something you've prepared for, like even if it's at a high level, not a super technical level, and you give your 30-second answer about DNS, right? It's different than if it's like, tell me about a technical challenge you overcame. And if that answer is only like 15 seconds, right? Oh, well, I remember this one time, like we managed to screw up, the router and blocked all the traffic on port 80 and it was a nightmare. And then we fixed it. That's probably not like the best way to frame that, even if that's the best answer you have to that question, right? You're going to want to work on that story. Danielle, do you want to chime in on some of this?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts that came to mind as you were describing that. One of which is that silence is not golden on your interview. I mean, it's okay to pause and take a drink or, collect your thoughts for a couple seconds. But, I've been on some interviews where the person I was interviewing, we asked a question and they didn't respond for upwards of 30 seconds to a minute. It was very uncomfortable for everybody. It was I felt very badly for that person actually, because I wish I could have them watch this presentation and I wanted to coach them. I wanted to actively coach that person. But be aware of your pauses if they're getting too long. But the other thing is that, kind of alluding to what John is describing, everything you put on your resume, you should be able to back up, with an example. Someone else that we had interviewed who their most recent experience was training. They trained people on some of the skill sets that we were looking for in the role. And then when we asked them about some of those skill sets, they couldn't articulate them. And the problem is if they're a trainer, they should absolutely be able to articulate that, So it just kind of called into question, like, what are they putting on the resume? Are they kind of over exaggerating what they did? What else on their resume did they exaggerate? So I would just caution you, to really make sure you're able to speak to those things actively. And kind of, what Kirsten had been saying, sometimes your story will help reveal your skills that you should be putting on the resume. So I would say that goes both ways as well. We talk about two-way relationships here. And that's one of them. Your stories and your resume should jive, and sometimes one can feed the other. So I think that's a great exercise to again go back to. But just make sure that you're able to speak to those things, because when as a hiring manager, when I get a resume, I'm going to quickly scan that, all of the experience for those key things that align the most with the role I'm looking to fill. And I'm going to ask you about those things specifically. I'm going to pull those things out. And so that is what you have to be really cognizant of. And you should also scan your resume before the interview. What are the things that they might pick out of here? Because those are the things I'm going to have to speak to, and really things that maybe they won't ask about. You can show them how that applies and how that is an asset for what they're looking to fill, right? And maybe they didn't think of that. So I would really advise on those few things.
Those are great points, and it brings me up to one of my favorite topics when I'm helping people with their resume, and they want to list every technical skill under the sun because they want to try and beat the applicant tracking system, the ATS, or they're just not sure how to really craft a good resume, so they're listing like everything on there. I routinely ask candidates about things on the resume that they cannot speak to. This occurs probably far more frequently than maybe people realize. So either it's something you did 10 years ago and you don't do it now, but it's just on there because you haven't updated your resume or you're afraid to take it off. This is also why please see all the other videos that me and others have released about crafting a crafted resume for a role, right? Because if you're applying for a cloud engineer role, the things you might want to call out may be different than if it's an IT sysadmin role, even if you have skill sets that overlap. But if you put something on your resume in your skill section or like a certification you took, if it's on the resume, you're going to have to be able to speak to it, which kind of ties into the technical prep we've talked about as well. It's pretty fascinating to me that people will continue to put things on the resume that they really can't even speak to, even broadly at all. I might not be able to intricately tell you about how to do an SQL injection, but I think I can probably figure out some stuff from way back in the day when I taught CH and have some little nugget and say and then I might ask if I'm going to do that because I thought this was a threat intel role I applied for. But, if it's on my resume, I'm going to be prepared to speak to it. So I don't know if we want to talk about technical prep. Well, we do have a question though. Hold on.
Yeah, do you want me to take it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So besides we've talked about preparing for behavioral questions, if you are interviewing at any of the large companies, just Google what type of questions it's out there, whether it's Glassdoor or it's I can't, Levels FYI, I think has some now. I mean, there's so many recent Blind, which I don't be careful with that one, but there's so many resources now where people publish these questions. So you can prepare. You can also look. One of the things I recommend people do is look at sort of the values that the company has, because if they say they're going to do behavioral questions, believe me, they're going to be aligned to those values, or they might call them principles. Mission, vision, all that will help you prepare for the behavioral. But if you do get to the point where you're just I am stuck and I don't know how to answer this, just ask to skip the question. I have never in my life held that against someone because I have more than one question normally that fits into this bucket, right? And so we'll just go into the next one. We can come back to it. Obviously take time and pause. But if you're just stuck, seriously, it's not a big deal. Just ask to skip it. Can we move on to the next question? Can we come back to it? Whatever you're comfortable with. But I just don't think that's a big deal. As I said, I've never held it against. I mean, you could end up with someone who does, but I just why waste a bunch of time if you don't have an answer?
I'll weigh in on this one as well because if I'm reading this correctly, you're asking about behavioral questions. So in reality, there's only a few different kinds. There's 80 different ways they might ask you the same 6 questions. Biggest weakness, biggest strength, a challenge, working in a team, overcoming a problem, what's your greatest value, what's your greatest attribute, which is all about your strength, right? I think it would be somewhat more obscure for you to get a behavioral question that wasn't like one of 6 or 7 different questions that typically get asked. But again, like if you're interviewing with like, our firm, we have like, the Booz Allen values in practice. So like maybe somebody from our company would ask you about, innovation or like, leaning into client problems. But that's also some of the things you can prepare for a little bit, even if your answer or your story isn't 100% aligned to that question, right? You might be able to work that, especially if you ask them to rephrase it a little bit. They're really asking about like, do I value innovative strategies? Do I value innovation in my team? Right. So then if you know that that's like one of their 5 or 6 values, maybe you can have a behavioral like story ready to go for that. But if that didn't answer your question, also please feel free to post another one and we can take follow-ups as well.
Yeah, I don't see what the harm would be in saying something like, I'd like to think about that for a little bit. Maybe, we could come back to that later. Because it shows that you're being thoughtful about it if you don't have an immediate answer. So I think I would appreciate hearing that if someone wanted to come back to it. And in all honesty, we probably won't get back to it because we're probably going to run out of time. Like, just to be completely honest. So, between answering, the interviewer's questions and, but at least I will think to myself, well, they actually want to have a time to think through this and actually, respond in a more controlled way. I can respect that. So
I definitely have had someone be unable to come up with the answer to a technical question, and this was a couple years ago. And I think they're like, "Oh, it's right on like the tip of my tongue, but I just can't think of it." And then like later on in the interview, they remembered the answer, and there was time, luckily, that they answered that. So yeah, I think that is a pretty good strategy as well. I want to get to the third bullet up here, which I think is really important, especially for a lot of the audience and the people who often attend the Diana Initiative in particular. I am a white man. I think I have built-in confidence from that fact to a large degree. I'm happy to be honest about that. Um, I have never applied for a job where I had all of the job qualifications, so stop excluding yourself. Just some like general advice, especially right now. I don't think I've ever been hired for a job where I knew how to do every aspect of the job. Like that's nonsense. Whether it was the technical or non-technical portion of the job, like there's gonna have to be some training. Um, I think as you look at job qualifications, if you're meeting 60, 70% of what's on the job application, I would encourage you to apply with your crafted resume for that field or that job, not your all in one generic resume. We have lots of talks about that. But please apply for the job and don't pre exclude yourself from consideration. There are a lot of cybersecurity jobs. I know the market's maybe shifting a little bit, but if you're preparing and you're ready to stand out and be energetic and be engaging, don't disqualify yourself by not even applying. I'd love to hear your all's thoughts on that.
My running joke is that I've never applied for a job that I was actually qualified for, which is like, let me be clear, super flippant. But I think in a lot of ways, I was just told from a young age, like, just apply. Like, what's the worst? They say no, right? And so like I think I'm actually even more generous than the 60 to 70. I figure if like you have most of the basic qualifications, but the preferred ones, not so much, like go ahead and apply. Like and maybe tell them why you're this unique candidate. I think people get concerned like that they'll get questions in the interview and it's going to be obvious that they don't have the qualifications. Explain your transferable skills. Explain like why your unique background is actually this awesome asset, right? Like don't like I can't emphasize this enough. Like go, like obviously there's some jobs like even for me that I want to like I would say I'm not qualified for, right? Like um like that I would totally exclude myself from. But for the most part, if you're interested in something, you've got those transferable skills, you have some experience, like so what if you don't have everything? Plus, I mean, cybersecurity is weird in so much that I think like I've never seen such bad job descriptions in my life. Like sometimes I'm just like, what happened here? Did you just throw in like every buzzword and everything possible into the job description? I get especially mad when it's like a entry level position because I'm just like, what? There's no way. Like, why are you listing all these things? As a hiring manager, I try to be very cognizant of what I actually needed versus like what would be nice to have. Um, and I think a lot of companies are getting better about that. But yeah, I'm totally for like just go for it. Like I'm constantly telling people just to go for it. And like as this like the worst case is they say no. The best case is you get some interview practice. I mean that's brilliant, right?
Yeah, Danielle, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just go for it. You know what I mean? Life's too short. Go for it. And I'll tell you this too, diversity is such a huge thing. Okay. And not everyone on the team should be the same. Not everyone on the team should have the same qualifications. People should bring different things to the table. And what you really need to show is your value with the skill sets you are bringing to the table, if it's not 100% solution for the qualifications, and also an aptitude for learning and just taking on the challenges for that role, because that's really what I want to see when I'm interviewing someone. They may not be a complete fit, really energized to learn, if they're really engaging, if they're passionate about that work, that's enough for me. I'm totally confident that that person is going to do the work to get spun up, to get up to speed, to learn those few skills that they may not have to be able to completely do the job. So yeah, excellent advice. And that's what I would say. I would say, like, really give them that sense that you're gonna dive right in, and if you have some gaps, that you're going to be able to actively fill those and continue to grow in your new role on that team.
Yeah, and I love the explain your transferable skills. I think that's so critical. The number one thing that I think everyone in cybersecurity does, regardless of which field you're in, is problem solve and research. You know who are really good problem solvers and researchers? People who have liberal arts degrees, English degrees, library science degrees. Right? Everybody's like, "Oh, I just got my bachelor in IT." They didn't teach you anything about cybersecurity in your IT course. Almost none of them do. You might understand IT, and like maybe you took the elective, and even a lot of people with computer science, computer security degrees, which there's not a lot of yet. And there are some that I've heard from students that aren't the greatest programs, right? So don't be like, oh, I don't have a degree in this or I don't have the certification, but work on your story about how you would figure out the answer to problems, because that's like the number one skill that I see a deficiency of in like more junior people and sometimes mid and senior people that I have worked with in my 12 years in cybersecurity is like, can you go figure out how to do X? And it's like, man, Google is your friend. Like, it's funny. Like, we see the meme all the time. It was like, the little meme that pops up on like Twitter or whatever of like, you're never going to be able to get a job just sitting at a computer Googling stuff. And it's like, that's literally my job, is to like Google things and figure stuff out.
I also think like one of the interesting ways, you can stand out if you don't have whatever, right? Whatever specific thing, is people often forget to kind of tell the narrative of like what they learned from mistakes or how they do something differently. Even if something went really well, what would you do differently? It's one of my favorite follow-up questions. I will ask people from here to Sunday, okay, cool, cool. So you did all that. What would you do differently? And I can tell you most people are not prepared for that question, which is really interesting to me because I'm constantly like, I guess I just have that like postmortem, like, you've got to figure out what you do differently in the future, like mindset, just due to the kinds of jobs I've had. But I think that's a really cool way to kind of stand out of in this like really packed, job atmosphere right now is what would you like, what'd you learn? What would you do differently? Because that also goes to that strength of like how do you learn, right? And like how do you think about things? And it's just, I don't know. Like that's just my recommendation. It's worked really well for me. I really tripped up some people and I'm so sorry for those
And
people.
and this is great because I need to say this before I forget it as well, because I encourage people to like volunteer at cybersecurity conferences or volunteer at their ISC Squared chapter, ISSA, or whatever, right? Volunteer at a nonprofit, volunteer to teach how to hack at the local, high school hacker club. Because if you have studied hacking for a year, you might know more than some of those, ninth graders, right? It's all relative, but you can use those answers in the interview, especially if you're pivoting in or are a student. Like if you're volunteering at like your local B-Sides conference or whatever cybersecurity conference you have, and you're like managing the Discord server or Slack or whatever, like those are positions of like legit responsibility you can and should be speaking to, because it also tells me a little bit about you and the type of person you are and how you're engaged in the broader cybersecurity community that I know I have a bias for when I talk to candidates about. Danielle, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, I wanted to piggyback on that real quick, and then I'll let Danielle chime in. If you're trying to figure out like how do I get the interview, if you volunteer, that's a nice way to network, and you might meet some folks who, if you do a really good job and you really show up, right, then they can talk to that in their like referral systems, right? They can be like, oh, whether they're talking to the hiring manager directly or they're putting it into some computer system, right? They can be like, I actually did work with this person, and here's what I saw. And that's so powerful because people seem to think that like the only connections that matter are the work connections, but those volunteer connections are just as critical. So like if you're not, if you're trying to figure out how to get interviews, that might be another way to get some additional interviews. That's all I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, Danielle, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, I think kind of the one angle I want to mention is, just personally on my resume, I've included some things that have nothing to do with my career, um, because of those transferable skills that we're talking about. So I served on the board of a nonprofit, and I had to manage a whole lot of things for that nonprofit, and so being able to show your versatility and your adaptability is so crucial in a lot of roles. Um, and that really kind of gives a sense of, well, this person, understands how to handle a whole breadth and depth of situations that they might encounter for, what I'm asking, what I'm thinking of, or even within a company, to John's earlier point that some companies that are larger might be looking for, to hire based on capability, not necessarily for a specific role. And just showing that you have that, active other experience that you can pull from, I think is really helpful when you can point out some of those things. And yeah, you also do make those contacts as well that you can pivot from in order to, find new opportunities as well. And even if, maybe the person that you're connecting with isn't going to be interviewing you, they could give you some of those inside tips, as far as what to expect, what the company might be like. Um, I used to work on a team at my company, which had a lot of different people from various backgrounds. And a lot of those people did move on to other companies. And, I've kept in touch. We don't talk every day or even every week, but I have their contact information. I catch up with them from time to time. And, sometimes they will reach out to their network and say, we're hiring if anyone's interested. And it's kind of cool to know that, you have some of those links that you can go back and see like, yeah, I actually am interested in this. Tell me more, and then, when you go to the interview, you'll be that much more prepared. So you never know how those connections are going to pay off. And so it's always valuable to, spend some time on that as well.
I'm going to talk a little bit more about these transferable skills because I think this is really important for non-traditional people who are trying to get into cybersecurity, whether you're a student, whether you're a career changer, a veteran getting out, coming back into the workforce after not being active in the workforce or something like that. And it goes back to like the volunteer stuff. We have a slide in here that we talked about a little bit about potentially avoiding controversial things, but I think you want to weigh, is this something that's important, a nonprofit I'm involved with? And I think there's plenty of things that aren't controversial you can include. I just think you want to work on your story around it, right? So like I think I work with someone who was a volunteer firefighter, right? Generally not that controversial. Like, right, there's a song F the police, there's not a song F the firefighters, right? It's generally not that controversial, right? Like please save people from the fire. So like, and like what kind of skills are you going to get from doing a job like that, man? All sorts of transferable skills, like around like crisis management, right? There's all sorts of things, right? So like don't be afraid to put things on your resume if you have that story, right, around the thing you're putting on your resume. Like I have that I'm a US licensed soccer coach on the resume because that's the hardest certification I've ever done by a long shot, much harder than CISSP. And I also learned a bunch of like communication and leadership skills out of that class. So like I have a story on there. So if somebody really wants to talk about it, that's fine. Because sometimes I will get asked about like which one of my certifications is the hardest. And I actually use that one. So I can talk about something else because I'm also trying to be memorable. Like I do not do cybersecurity 24/7. Like I am not that person anymore at this point in my career. And I want to come across to the hiring managers if I'm interviewing with like, oh, this is a person and that he's really interested in all this other stuff. I give talks, I volunteer at the Diana Initiative. I want that to come across because I would want to join a team that values everything I'm bringing to the table. All right, we can move on to some of these other topics. I think that is a little bit into it's a two-way interview, which we have discussed a bit. I don't know if we have any other points on that in particular that you all want to bring up. No. Wait, also talk. Oh, go ahead, Danielle.
One thing I'll just quickly add to what you were saying is absolutely make sure you self-edit yourself when you're adding other experience. I recently interviewed someone and their resume had a ton of other things on there. And they had a career gap, And so I understood that they were trying to put stuff in there to show what they had been doing in the intervening years. And that made sense to me. But I also felt like that distracted away from kind of the purpose of the interview and the role we were looking to fill. And so just be very careful, like how much you're putting on there for those roles. I'm not saying don't put them on there at all, but be careful what bullets and how many bullets and really what you're trying to draw their attention to, because it could be distracting to a point. So I would just make sure, I always advise people, put everything in there, lay it all out there, and then go back and self-edit yourself and ask yourself, is this too much? Get another set of eyes on it too. I know we haven't really talked about resume building, but get another independent sanity check on it if you can. But just make sure you try to look at it from their perspective, and really try to key in on those things that you really want them to see and focus on. Otherwise, it could be a distraction. So wanted to add that.
Yeah, those are good points. In general, your resume is probably too long, generally speaking. And there's a lot of tips on resume editing. One of the things that's going around on Twitter that I want to mention real quick is you don't have to pay for resume advice. There are certain times or roles, especially at the executive level, that there are people that specialize in that kind of thing. If you are in the job market because you've been laid off, or you're a student, or you're fairly mid-career, or you're switching careers, there are free resources on resumes. Please hit me up on Twitter. I give talks on this. I run the Resume Village for the Diana Initiative. There's a lot of people and resources for you for free about resumes, and you absolutely probably need to spend more time on your resume than you spend on your resume. I do want to talk about like following up. We get this a lot, and unfortunately, our recruiter has left us because she is unwell. But I get this question a lot from candidates or people that I've talked to or mentored about how often they should follow up. And I think generally speaking, like you should be in fairly routine contact with the recruiter, especially if they're a recruiter, a larger company, and maybe you've applied for more than one role there. But I think you want to balance that with pestering them because they're probably working with hundreds of candidates. And I think there's a fine balance between following up a couple of days after your interview and then maybe a week. And if like a week or 2 weeks go by and you haven't heard anything, I don't know that it's continually beneficial to pester them. I know candidates get really frustrated when they don't hear back, and I am sorry for that fact. I always try to give my feedback pretty much immediately or by the end of the day to like about a candidate I reviewed. But we do get that a lot, and I don't know there's a hard and fast rule for that, right? It's maybe give it a couple of days, and then if you don't hear anything, a couple of days again. But I would say like if you're just not hearing back, that's probably the indicator that you weren't perhaps down selected or selected for the role. I want to talk about, and we're not getting a lot of questions, so if you're still here, there's a couple people watching. If you have a question, let us know. I want to cover why are you changing jobs or why are you interested in this position question, because this may be really important, especially with the job situation in the current market. We've seen a number of companies, with layoffs lately. But let me pass it along for your all's thoughts around sort of trying to answer that question. If you, how do you think candidates want to maybe approach that given their situation?
I could chime in here. So I think that there are a lot of aspects to this. One thing is own your story. You have a motivation and you have a why. We talk about that all the time in my community choir. Your why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? What is the purpose? What am I trying to achieve? And I know we talked about earlier how that's very different for many people depending on this situation. And it may not even be a choice to change your job. It's a forcing function if you were laid off, and you just don't have, any control over that. I also think there's a distinction between changing careers and just changing jobs. So it really depends on how big of a change are you making. But have a discerning eye on your resume, because if there is a gap in your work history, or if you are really changing the type of role you're applying for, to have that prepared as far as like why you're changing it. But I think in many ways, it will come off fairly well regardless of the conditions if there's some aspect of growth and that you're trying to get toward, because most people change jobs because they want to continue to grow their career, they want to continue to develop. There's something that they've always been interested in and they're finally pivoting to go in that direction, and that passion is behind that decision, right? So I think if you come into it, with that energy, and you talk about the fact that you are looking to grow your skills, you're looking to advance, you're looking to continue in a certain field or pivot to a new one to build, or even if you're going after your dream job, to be there's a line between being open and transparent and owning that story that you're bringing to the table. So I think that's kind of where I would come at it from. I know that if it's not in your control, you would want to be honest about the fact that maybe you you were laid off, or there was some other issue that ended up having to change jobs. But I think if you bring the passion and the energy behind that answer, um, regardless of the circumstance, that it's going to come off very positively for your interviewer, your hiring manager.
I think a lot of people internalize when they get laid off, like there must be something wrong with me, or like, and it's a very negative experience, right? Like you went from having security to having it just ripped out from under you, because usually these things happen fairly quickly. There's not a ton of warning. If you're in a phenomenal org that can warn you ahead of time, great, but it still doesn't, like, there's just not enough runway to be prepared for it, right? So I think, like, just remember that this is kind of what's happening right now in the industry. It's not a reflection of you. Like, to Danielle's point, you need to be honest about it, right? Like, I was laid off, but I just, to me, that, I'm still like, obviously I'm helping lots of people right now who've recently been laid off. I just, like, I know what phenomenal candidates they are. I can talk to their strengths. I just don't think people are really all that alarmed by it, to be honest. I think we're all just sort of expecting this. And especially out of certain companies, we just know that they've always had certain rates for getting rid of folks. And it's not, just wasn't a good fit. It's just not a big deal, right? And so I think just being able to be confident in your capabilities and to know yourself, like, as I said, it's definitely hard. It's definitely a hard thing to happen. Definitely take time for it. Like, but there are people who also take sabbaticals, right? Like, they basically leave the workforce for a short period. It isn't necessarily the folks that go on, and leave for a long time, but they'll leave for 3 to 6 months just because the job got to be too much and they're trying to take care of themselves, and like, just own that story, right? Like, be able to explain like why you took the time and why you're ready to come back into the workforce, because somebody's probably going to ask you. um the one thing I wanted to call out is, like, why are you changing jobs? The question you should be prepared for, and it's one that I don't have the best answer to this day for. I'm the person that likes to flip between management and IC a lot. I do it all the time. And it's not hard to explain, like, why do you want to be a manager? It's actually harder to be like, why do you want to go back to being an IC? But if you are doing that kind of transition, you have to have a really solid answer, because for whatever reason, right, that seems to throw a lot of people off. That sort of flipping back and forth between the two. Um, I have okay answers, you know, but I just wanted to call that, because I do think, like, if you are doing something very uh, along those lines, like leadership versus like IC, even though ICs can be leaders, that's bad wording. If you're going from management to IC, like, do have a good narrative for why. I do think we have a question from the audience, John. I don't know if you want to hit that one.
Yeah, so we've got a question here about crafting your story, and do you have tips or resources to figure out how to craft your story? I think if you're having trouble doing this yourself, you can come to one of the career villages in the cybersecurity community and talk to a recruiter, because the recruiters at the cybersecurity communities, like Kirsten, are there and like are volunteering their time, to help people with this, right? I think a lot of people see like the cybersecurity career villages as fix my resume, and like go there with a recruiter and they're going to be able to help you one-on-one, or contact other people in this space who are doing this work to help with that at an individual level. My advice is you want to balance like your personality, your strengths you're bringing to the table, and have it be reflected on like the job to some degree. So like I am very sarcastic and humorous, and it comes out in the way I've crafted my stories, because if that's not a fit, let's find that out in the interview, right? And so like I have like my whole personal story about always being involved with computers since my dad had a compact 286 monochrome laptop on the Snap-on tool truck, and I needed to figure out how to make that thing work, right? So I may have been in SIGINT in the intelligence community for a long time, but I was always the IT person for the entire extended family, right? And I have like this whole story around that. Is that 100% related to like the role I'm applying for? But that's like, if I can get that story out in 60 seconds and then have like another 30 seconds or maybe another 60 seconds, right? So we're only at 2 minutes about this specific role, then one, hopefully that's a pretty memorable story and it's kind of funny, right? Of running the 110-foot the RJ11 telephone cable out so he could send his order and we couldn't talk on the phone for like an hour and a half, right? Because that's how old I am. And then like, so that's like how I got interested in computers. And then I was in a technical field in the military, right? Technical intelligence. And then I got out and saw like cybersecurity was probably a path I wanted to pursue. So like I have spent a really long time figuring out that story. And I probably only got that story in the last like 5 or 6 years. So you want to kind of talk through like what's pertinent to your background. What are your transferable skills if like you're a student or again pivoting from a different career, right? That you want to highlight, right? Whatever strengths you're bringing, research, communication, collaboration, root cause analysis, like whatever strengths generally are important to cybersecurity. I'm a good public speaker. I have attention to detail, like whatever it might be, and then like why you're a good candidate for that role or this type of a role. Like those are the things I think that you want to hit. But let me turn it over for everybody else's thoughts.
Yeah, and I think it's about, your motivations, your objectives by doing the interview. Um, what are you looking to accomplish by taking on that role? Where are you headed? Just having some confidence behind some of those answers. Um, I almost want to say it kind of starts with your elevator speech, like tell us about yourself. That's kind of where it all starts, right? Which we kind of covered at the beginning of this. Um, but you build upon that. Like there are layers to that, right? So, when you think about the questions you might be asked, underneath all of those technical or non-technical questions is that whole context of who you are, what you're about. Why are you here at the interview? Why cybersecurity? Why this company? Like all of those pieces of those answers are part of your story. And when we talk about owning that story, it's about bringing that confidence level about this is who I am. I'm bringing a lot to the table. Here, let me show you this. Like here's what I'm explaining to you, right? When you talk about strengths. So I think when we say, own your story, like that's kind of what I'm referring to is, you want to bring that confidence level when you explain those different things and those different answers. And all of that should align to build a picture for them about who you are, what you bring to the table, and why you'd be a great fit for that. And I think, we touched on it very briefly too, but it goes back to like, you might sit through this whole interview and you might be the one at the end of the interview who thinks this isn't for me. Lee brought that up earlier about that happening to her. And so you have to be ready for that eventuality too. Like maybe you don't like the story they're telling you. Maybe you don't like their story. Maybe they don't own their story. I would say, it'd be a real shame for an interviewer to walk into it and be, really lackluster about talking about the company. That's not going to give you a lot of confidence. So again, it's a two-way connection, right? So they have to own their story too. And if they don't, then they may not be able to bring in you as their talent to support that. And so, yeah.
What might be helpful, like if you're struggling with like what is my story, is to start with just some bullet points. Like what are you really good at? Like what are you super proud of? What are the interesting things you want to make sure you talk about? You may have a resume, right? Like let's even assume you do have one. Go through and highlight the things that you're especially like keen on. And the interesting thing about your story is, remember how I was saying like you have to be able to answer like why am I flipping between things? My story is obviously going to be a little different if I'm pitching myself for, a management role versus an IC role. I remember even like my pitch for being a CISO, which is still a little strange to me in retrospect, but like like it's going to change. It's still like fundamentally there are things that I bring to the table no matter what the job that I'm just super proud of, right? But having that sort of like bullet list and then kind of comparing it to the role so I can begin to craft that story to match what they're looking for, I think is super helpful. I'd also say like you have friends, you have relatives, you have a network of some sort. Like ask people, like be like, hey, this is my elevator pitch for myself, especially if they know you really well. Because they can just be like, well, I like this, but I don't like that. You're underselling yourself, you're overselling yourself. Like they're a good like bounce back. So I would definitely say if you're struggling, like start with bullet points and then just start like pitching people and see what they think.
Yeah, this has been great advice. You hopefully have some trusted people in your life that can help you with this. Maybe before you go talk to the recruiter at a career village or something. And then some of this like will depend, right? Like if you're interviewing at like one of the big four, right? Like Ernst and Young or PwC, you might be like, I've always dreamed of working for one of the big four. Like just everybody knows like how professional like this is. Like you might want to like have something around that, right? Versus if you also are basically just looking for a job because you have been laid off from Twitter and you kind of need a job, then you probably want a different story that is genuine, right? About like, oh, I found this position. I know you guys are a small startup firm in the aerospace sector, and I've always thought that that was, a really interesting place to work. And I know that the startups have lots of different challenges, so might have to handle a lot of different types of things, right? So like, I just made all that up, but like these are the sorts of things you may want to work on and see what sticks. Like I can't tell you like how much looking, and I know that this is people hate this, but like you can record yourself too. Like I know people hate to hear that as well, but like see if it like is it genuine. Like the first time I ever watched a recording of myself give a presentation, like it's very painful, and then I got slightly better. You can do the same thing with interview practice so that you're kind of practicing how you might answer some of these behavioral questions or like about yourself. And you don't want to memorize it. Like it shouldn't be memorized. You could have your sticky with some notes you want to cover on the side, like, oh, I remember the first time I ever downloaded malware from Napster or whatever, right? Like, because that's again, like I'm funny though, and like you do, I think, want to see some of the personality, right? Because you want to make sure it's a fit. Um, Again, understanding everyone's in a different situation. We had someone comment about the I Am Remarkable workshop. I don't know what that is. Is there a link to that, or was that recorded at all? I'd be interested in trying to get more details on that though. We've also sort of, without necessarily addressing it, although Lee, you spoke about it, like what are you looking for in your next position? We've sort of talked all around that. The other type of behavioral question that I think is fairly common is where do you see yourself in the next 1 to 2 years, 3 to 4 years? Or like, people ask that question. It's actually not the world's best question. I sometimes ask that, even though I know it's not a good question. Um, I've removed it from the questions I normally ask, but sometimes like by default I ask it. So like that's another example of one of those like fairly standard questions you might get though. I think it is potentially harder if you're just entering cybersecurity because maybe you just really don't know a whole lot yet. But it could be equally difficult if you're senior as well. But that could be something where like you can work on like crafting a story of like, oh, I'm looking to move into technical management to get more of those responsibilities, or I'm looking to move back into an individual contributor role to get really technical and hands-on into the weeds and help the mission and the business be successful from an individual standpoint, right? So like you can try to craft how you might answer some of those questions.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that question either, John. Mostly because I struggle to answer it myself sometimes. So, especially when they go out and they say like 10 years, I'm just like, oh my gosh. In, in the cybersecurity world, it could be anywhere in 10 years. So, I don't really think that's a valid one. But
10 years, I hope to win the Powerball and get out of here. Also, I saw this the other day. Just FYI, if you're still with us, like I'm pretty sure the current owner of Twitter should have like destroyed imposter syndrome for anybody else. Just FYI, so please apply for the job that you're not maybe 100% qualified for, because clearly that like nobody should have imposter syndrome at this point if you're on Twitter, by the way.
But I think we all do. Like, that's sort of the problem, right? Hence the nerves, as we talked about earlier. I also hate the like, where do you find, like, where will you be, or where do you want to be? Like, I dodge that question. Like, I'm horrible about it. I'll be honest, I completely dodge that question by being like, well, I don't really know where the technology is going to be in 3 to 5 years. So it's really hard for me to pick a place for me to be. Mostly because I don't have a good, for me, like my story, I don't know what how my story ends, right? Like I guess at some point I retire. Okay, cool. But like from where I am now to where I retire, I could take so many paths, right? And so for me, like I just want to keep exploring, and that's why I tend to dodge it and be like, I don't know where technology is going, but I'm really excited to see. Hopefully that doesn't turn off the person who's interviewing me.
But you've practiced that. I think that's a great question. If you were like, cybersecurity has changed so much in the last couple of years, and now we're at zero trust and 5G and AR. I don't even know what things are going to look like in 2 to 3 years. So that's a really tough question for me to answer. And then you look at them, and then they feel bad.
I'm just super honest. Like I just don't know. But like part of my like reason for not knowing is I just don't know where the technology is headed. And that like I guess like for me it's like I don't want to cut off any paths that could be possible.
And I think another question, which I sometimes ask, although I also don't like it as much, is, hey, I'm just being honest. There's only so many questions I come up with for the interview. This is why I want them to do the talking, because I got to ask these terrible questions. And if I run out of stuff, is like, if you could design your ideal job, or what was an ideal job look like to you, or something to that effect. So again, that's a routine question people may ask. And again, I answered that question by being funny, and I was like, well, if I could do anything, I'd be a professional soccer coach. But in cybersecurity, I guess it would look like this, because I'm funny, because that would be my ideal job, would be like to just go coach soccer and never do any of this again. So FYI, if you're hiring, let me know if there's some openings, professional soccer, hit me up. Do we have any other audience questions pending? I'm not seeing anything coming through. So I will turn it over for maybe some final thoughts if we don't get any other questions. Danielle, I appreciate you joining us today. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the audience before we maybe wrap things up?
Oh man, we've talked about so many things. I want to say that I have found this highly useful, just being a participant and hearing everyone else's perspectives. So thank you all for all the things you've shared, because it's nice to hear other perspectives on this. I would just say to take away some of the things that we highlighted. Bring the energy, bring the confidence, like show the passion that you have for the role that you're interviewing for, because those are so important. Show that aptitude for learning, to fill any gaps that there might be. Even if you want to go as far at the end of the interview to ask them, is there anything else that I can address for you that we haven't covered for this role? Like, turn it back on them and ask them that. Like, don't leave the interview uncertain that you ticked all their boxes. Ask them that at the end, and maybe that's a great way to circle back and really show them that you wanting to be thoughtful about the questions around the role. So I would just say those are my high points for the tips here, because if you're showing them that passion and energy and that aptitude for taking things on, then that is, to me, hitting a lot of those behavioral components that they want to see, to make sure that you're going to be able to dive right in on their team. I mean, there's a lot more obviously there from the technical side, but you know, if I'm seeing someone, they could be the smartest person in the room, but they look bored and really unexcited about the role, then I probably won't put them at the top of my list. So that's probably what I would take away from all of this.
Thanks, Danielle. I appreciate your time today. Hopefully the rest of your drive is, successful and boring and it's not very exciting.
Thanks.
Yeah. Good luck with that. Have a great Thanksgiving.
You too.
Lee, any final thoughts you want to leave anybody with?
So I think practice, I know that's where we started all this, is really important, right? Like it just like in anything, right? The first time you get on stage, you want to practice before you get on stage. There, you can over prepare, to be clear, right? But for the most part, just practicing, feeling comfortable with your answers, feeling comfortable with your tech skills, feeling comfortable with those uncomfortable questions, those like I don't knows, can we come back to this? Like having those like easy ways to keep the interview going, I think is really key. Um, One thing I noticed, we talked about like how soon to follow up. I forgot to say this. I tend to like immediately after the interview write a very short like thank you note that I send to the recruiter because I don't actually want to get everyone like I don't know how you not in a like in this virtual world how you avoid like the really awkwardness of like trying to write down someone's email address you can get it right. So I just asked the recruiter to thank everybody for me. So I do like a very abbreviated thank you, but like I do try to say thank you. I do think that matters. People took time to talk to you no matter what. Like you should thank them for that. Nothing long again. So I did want to call that out because I've always done that and I don't always get the job. So it's not like I don't think in the grander scheme of things it's a big deal, but it does show that you're still interested, right? It's a nice way to wrap on the experience. And I would just say, like, keep going. Like, you're going to get some rejections. We all do. I mean, there have been jobs I've really, really wanted that I really, really didn't get, right? But that just means there's a different door opening later on for me that's going to be awesome. And so just try to stay positive. I do recommend the hype song, but that's me. But whatever you can do to bring that energy, like whatever to get excited, do that. And yeah, we're all rooting for you. And if we can help, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm still on Twitter. Not sure I get Mastodon. I know a lot of people are over there. The Diana Initiative also has a Discord server. We have a ton of materials. This slide deck is available. There's links to our resources. I have given other talks. Kirsten Renner has given other talks about resumes. If you continually apply, you're not getting any feedback, then I would say work on your resume and try to attend a resume clinic or a career fair in cybersecurity. If you are getting the interviews and then you're not getting offers, then have a different conversation with the recruiters and the people at those career villages, right? So the resume only can get you the interview. The interview gets you offers. So I know a lot of times people really, 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 really only focus on the resume, which is why I wanted to do this workshop, because I have been interviewing a lot of people and I want to make sure people are spending time prepping on the interview as well. Mostly people want you to be successful, right? Like the candidates, the hiring, like the recruiters, everybody wants you to be successful. So if you are working with recruiters and you're not getting a great vibe from them, like there's a lot of recruiters to work with. If you have questions, I will try to get to you. You can send me a DM. I will answer as many questions as I possibly can. I am actually taking PTO next week to watch the World Cup. So ask me questions. I will answer you as I cry watching the US team probably not do great, unfortunately. That's the reality of the situation. And if you have any other questions, hit us up. I hope to see some of you at the Diana Initiative. We're August 7th and 8th this year in person in Vegas. So there's the Diana Initiative, B-Sides Vegas, DEF CON. I will be there again in person this year. So feel free to stop by. And hopefully this has been helpful. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Danielle. Thanks to Kirsten, who joined us even though she was sick. We couldn't do all of this without everybody's volunteer. And thanks, Jamie, in the background for helping with all of this as well. I appreciate that. Have a good Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.